It's taking me so many tries to actually just start speaking for the podcast. Like I was just talking about game theory, but people kept coming into my room, so I had to, stop and start again. By game theory, I don't mean the, economic statistical concept. I mean the YouTube channel. But yeah, speaking of game theory, hello internet and welcome to Internalize, the podcast where, you know, nothing has any structure to it whatsoever and I'm just going insane the moment I start speaking. And the reason I was talking about game theory is I was suggesting that my intros are turning very game theory-esque, which I do sort of agree with, barring the, first like 15 seconds of it is always like sort of retention focused for game theory and not so for me. But yeah, that's what I like. Game theory stuff, they make nice things, but yeah, I don't think actually they're scripted. That's what I was talking about in terms of game theory. I think I don't think they're not scripted. I think they are scripted because they do script stuff super well, and they're sort of known for being very or rather MatPat is known for being very analytical and very good at that side of the whole YouTube game, which, yeah, that's cool, I suppose. And yeah, game theory, great channel. But I digressed a lot already. Speaking of game theory and theory, there's no connection at all. I want to talk about DaVinci Resolve again. So DaVinci Resolve, famous software, owned by Blackmagic Design, who makes really nice cameras. I actually want a Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera 6K, a retro one from, relatively speaking, retro. I want one of those cameras. Very nice, cool cameras. They have a software called DaVinci Resolve, and anyone who has been in the tech slash filming slash whatever sphere, they know that these guys are no joke. What am I saying? Yeah, Resolve, very very featureful, very well known video editing program. The reason DaVinci Resolve is so well known, I believe, or at least that's my hypothesis, is because they're free. And among the like super industry standard or super featureful, feature filled, feature packed programs, DaVinci Resolve is the only one that's truly free, that has a free tier that's actually worth using. But yeah, and even for the non-free plan, it's just a one-time purchase, which is much better than whatever Adobe charges. They charge like bonkers amount every year. I'm actually gonna just check how much they charge for Premiere Pro subscription fee. It costs 1,675 rupees a month, which is around I want to say $20 a month, which is insane. It's like more than $200 a year. And $200 is the whole price upfront for a lifetime license to DaVinci Resolve Studio, which is like the fancy, optimized, better, more features got a version of DaVinci Resolve. But yeah, anyway, DaVinci Resolve, super famous editing program. And around October, I believe, if I remember correctly, October is when they brought Resolve finally to the iPad Pro, or rather, not just the iPad Pro, the iPad line as a whole. They ported over the Mac and PC apps to iPad, or they created one from the ground up. We may never know what they actually did, but they started off with Resolve for iPad, and I was super excited by that because my iPad has been sort of neglected in the grand scheme of tech things, because you can only do so much with an iPad without real professional applications on it. But yeah, we finally got professional applications for iPad, and I wanted to use Resolve for iPad for a bit and come to some sort of good judgment about it, about whether it's a software that's worth using. And I think I've used it enough now to come to a judgment about that. So let's get going. First off, I want to talk about features, like feature parity between the Mac OS and Mac OS PC, etc., versus the iPad version. First off, there's no edit page. I keep saying cut instead of edit. There's no edit page. Anyone who's used Resolve knows that there is the primary page for editing called the edit page. And that's where you have your very Premiere style non-linear editing timeline. And that's where you have, that's where most people spend their time editing. If you're on Final Cut, you'll probably be more familiar with what the cut page looks like. I mean, or if you prefer Final Cut's editing style, the cut page is basically a lot like faster. It's a lot more short edits, more rough cuts, more just setting in and out points for your clips. It has a magnetic timeline, unlike Resolve, or unlike Resolve's edit page on the PC and Mac. But yeah, there is no edit page on the iPad at all, which is kind of depressing because I really like using the edit page. You can kind of enable it. I think you need to create a keyboard shortcut to enable it and then enable it using a wireless keyboard or something. But that's like really hacky. I mean, it feels really hacky to do even though it's built into the app, but it's just kind of weird. I'm not a big, fan of that. If you want people to use it, just enable it by default, right? So yeah, that is kind of sad that it's not there, because the cut page, while it does work for most things, it is it is lacking a little bit compared to the edit page. Next, Fairlight, which is basically Resolve's equivalent of Adobe Audition. It's sort of like a mini DAW or a mini what do you call it? Audio editing application built into Resolve. It's like Audacity, I suppose, but it has support for like VST3s and DLLs, everything. It's really nice and it works pretty well most of the time. And I quite like Fairlight. I like that it has a built-in sound library as well, which is really nice if you just want to find random effects and stuff. You don't really have to go to the internet and download things from dodgy websites. But yeah, that's very, very nice. But it's absent on the iPad, which is kind of sad. Again, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know about Fairlight, whether it's enableable using a keyboard, but it's not there by default, which is really sad because the audio manipulation or editing workflow on Resolve for iPad at least really, really quite minimal. It's really quite sad. There's barely anything, so to at least compared to the PC and Mac versions. Still probably more than something like iMovie, I guess. Next, again, Fusion. The Fusion page is notably absent. Again, kind of sad, but I think the Fusion page is it's iPad locked, because my iPad is kind of old. It may be just locked because the iPad is kind of old, but it may be present for newer iPads. Honestly, I've not done enough research to come to a judgment based on that. But yeah, just put an asterisk. It's absent, like sort of maybe absent, but yeah. Anyway, so Fusion, for anyone who's unaware, by the way, Fusion is basically like Adobe After Effects. It's like it's just for visual effects, and like if you really want to manipulate something further beyond just cutting and color grading, that kind of thing, that you use Fusion or After Effects for. Well, absent, sort of, at least I think absent. What is good though, what is good about DaVinci Resolve on the iPad is that the color page is present, and it's like exactly the same as it is on PC. The color page, I mean, DaVinci Resolve is known for being a color grading application. Like in the Hollywood world, people edit on other applications and they literally just use Resolve for coloring, and it's that good just for coloring. And it's literally the exact same thing that's carried over to my iPad. It's exactly the same. It works exactly how I know it works, and it's awesome. I really like the color page, and I just thank God it's there. Thank God it's there by default. You don't have to enable anything for that. And again, as I alluded to, the cut page is sort of like the iMovie of DaVinci Resolve, I suppose. Like it's maybe not as featureful as the edit page, but it's still pretty good. Like you can, it's really fast, and it's really simple to just get started and make something, take something out of your brain and put it down on the timeline. That is really good about the cut page. Yeah, so the cut page, pretty, it's not really that easy to get used to, but once you get used to it, it's really nice. It's pretty fun to just throw down things on the timeline on the cut page, set in and out points, blah blah blah, work really quickly. That's, that's really good about the cut page on Resolve. Now, on top of features, something quite important to think about is interface, because if you have a PC app on the iPad, it'll just not work because the interface isn't, the iPad interface is a touch first interface. You cannot use a KBM interface like a video editing app, for example. You cannot use that on, you cannot just port it over directly without making significant changes. And it looks like there are some slight changes, but there are also like pretty glaring flaws in Resolve's interpretation of, or rather Resolve's version, Resolve's port of uh, their app to iPad. First off, keyboard and mouse works fine. It works really well most of the time. And you do have like special menus for keyboard shortcuts in the settings and things. So there is some incentive to use the keyboard and mouse apart from just, convenience or familiarity. But touch and pencil is probably where most of the interest is. First off, I think they've done a pretty decent job. I'm gonna complain a lot after this, but overall it's really pretty simple to just edit with touch or the pencil, and it works pretty decently most of the time. And I'm happy with that. I'm pretty okay with having a decent interface if you're having the kind of power that Resolve does have. But there are like three main glaring flaws I've noticed with the pencil slash touch design. First off, the buttons are tiny. Like, I don't know who decided to make mouse sized buttons for like, I don't know, for the iPad. It's insane. It's really difficult to do like precise work. It's really difficult to hit like the next frame button, for example, or increase your scaling by 0.1%. It doesn't work. It's really poor. And that, yeah, it's really infuriating a lot of the time, because you stuck making rough adjustments without having the ability even to go and make something like that's smoother, right? You want things to be smooth, I suppose. Anyway, I digress. Next up, there are a lot of swipe gestures. For a lot, basically the click and drag gesture has been replaced by a swipe, and swipes, the area for swiping is really small. So if you want to, let's say, alter the part of a video clip that's playing on the timeline, you can click on a button and swipe on that clip. While it works, it's pretty unreliable because the button A is pretty small and B, the clip itself is pretty small. So it's really annoying, especially if you don't have a pencil and you have stubby fingers. It gets pretty infuriating a lot of the time. And lastly, the right click is just nonsense. There is technically a right click. I mean, you have to press and hold on something to get right click. But first of all, the amount of time you hold is just nonsense. You have to hold it for so long to bring up the secondary click menu. That's number one. And secondly, it's just not that easy to hold it for that long without, dragging the clip. Honestly, I think it should just be like if you click with two fingers on a clip, it opens up the secondary click menu, which is how it is in a lot of applications and how it is if you're navigating Resolve with the trackpad on, if you have a Magic Keyboard, or even on Mac and Windows, that's how right click is done on Resolve. But overall, I think it's pretty good. The interpretation, or the, I don't know what the word is, the delivery, how they've done it is pretty nice. It's not so bad. Then On top of that, let me think. Uh, yeah, that's all I suppose for interface. And finally, I want to talk about performance and playback. Uh, Performance, pretty, pretty amazing. That's the main reason I'm using Resolve on iPad, like exclusively almost now. First of all, playback is not great, honestly speaking. It's pretty jittery on my 2 year old iPad. For 2 generation old, I mean. For context, it's the multi-core scores on Geekbench is about half of what it is for the newest M2 iPad, which is mid, I suppose. But it's fine. It works. But yeah, it's pretty jittery, pretty laggy, scrubbing and playing pausing. Uh, it's much better than my laptop, though. I mean, my computer. Ever since I downloaded Resolve 18, for some reason, it's just not played back clips. Whenever I try playing back things, it just completely crashes. Playing back something that's not a still picture, that is, just completely crashes, which is bonkers, and it's really difficult to deal with it. That's really annoying. I don't like it at all. It's gotten to the point where I just don't use it anymore. I just stopped using Resolve on my computer if I need to edit anything that's not a podcast episode. That's that's really bad. Now export. The thing is, even before this issue with Resolve 18, my computer couldn't handle Fusion clips, like Fusion titles, transitions, that kind of thing, because it doesn't have a dedicated GPU. It's just integrated Ryzen 5 graphics, which is altogether pretty mid. So Fusion doesn't really work that well, which is fine. But on the iPad, it actually works pretty nicely. Playback, if you're playing over the Fusion clip, it does lag quite a lot, but export works pretty perfectly. Like, for context, I usually get around real-time exports on my computer, but on the iPad, I get a lot faster than real-time, often twice as fast as real-time, which basically means if you have a 5 minute video, it real-time means it renders out in 5 minutes. Faster than real-time, of course, means that it renders in less than 5 minutes. In my case, it renders probably in around 2 minutes, which is really amazing. And especially even if you have Fusion clips and stuff, when the rendering happens over the clip, it slows down to like a few FPS, like 1 or 2 FPS. But once it gets past that render bit, it ramps back up to, whatever, 90, 100 FPS, which is like pretty amazing render times. So yeah, that performance really good even on really old iPads. And that's all, I suppose. To conclude, I think the features, although they're pretty limited, they're really nice for an iPad editing application. Secondly, interface has been pretty decent, although it's also sort of limited in many areas. But performance, as is customary with Apple apps, absolutely incredible optimization, just out of this world. And that's why I'm just going to use Resolve on the iPad from going forward. It's also better than Final Cut in the sense that you have it on a lot more iPads, which is really nice. So yeah, that's all for today. Thank you so much for listening, and I will catch you next week. See you.